Welcome back to this very final episodes on model view, at least in programming with Qt Widgets. In this episode, I'll give you 20 pointers to what to watch from the Qt Widgets and more episodes in case you haven't been there already. There are links to all of the videos in the description below, but if you somehow managed to get out of sync with YouTube, downloaded the video, well, I don't know what, then the link to the whole series is right here. And I will give you links throughout the next 20 slides to where you'll find the individual pieces. But I'll give you them as episode numbers too, so you don't need to write down the URLs for each of them. Just remember this one URL here to go and find them. I've split it into 3 sections. There is 7 episodes, or 7 Qt Widgets and more episodes about how you code your model view, which is super important as a follow-up to what we've been talking. Then there are 5 episodes with tips and tricks. That is a bit further away, but still relevant for model view programming. And finally, 8 episodes on use cases, stuff that I show how do you do this in model view. The first episode here from Qt Widgets and more, episode 10, is communicating between view and delegates on one side and the model on the other side. This isn't really all that new to you. If you have been following closely, you have seen how I, in the delegates section, was able to go and ask the model some questions that was not visible in the view. This is custom roles, and I have an example here where I go from my KDAB table view into a filter model, from there into a sort model, into a cancelled filter, into a date filter, and finally, and we don't even see that here in the screenshot, into the actual model. But it's a good example of a real world experience of model view. Episode number 10. The next one here is episode 12. Sometimes you need to go back all the way. You need to go down into the actual real model. You get an index and you want to call a method on the real model, but you need to get an index for that real model. And it basically boils down to the code that you see here. I am just continuously asking for the source model of my current model and mapping the index that I have to the source model and just iterating through here. Episode 12 goes into more details on that. Next one, I've hinted it already, and you might already have watched these 2 episodes. This is about proxy model. And I set out on a path or on a journey where I wanted to implement a complete proxy model. And what the proxy model does is that it reverses the rows of my input model. So the model simply takes the source model and makes column or row 0 be row 9 and row 2 row 8 and so on. And that was rather complicated. It was so complicated that these 2 episodes together is almost an hour, but definitely worthwhile an hour if you want to really dive into how do I implement a model or a proxy model so that it does do exactly the right thing when it comes to the signals. It took me almost a week to make this episode, and I had a lot of code reviews from several people in KDAB to help me make sure that I did do things entirely right. So huge inspiration for you, hopefully. Episode 70 and 71. Then I had 3 episodes, and I already hinted that quite heavily in the episodes on delegates. I have here 3 episodes on delegates. The first one, I create a framework where I simply create a new superclass for delegates that makes it relatively easy to work with delegates. Then the follow-up one is some real-world example where I show, for example, this one here from my own code base where I have a delegate that both shows a value a percentage and an arrow. And obviously I need to polish that slightly bit so that I don't have 1 pixel off. That obviously I see when I present here. But that's the episode 79. And finally, I talk in episode 80 about editing delegates. And maybe you can skip that one. I think that is more or less what I told you in the slides. But hey, maybe worthwhile to spend 10 minutes recap on what editing delegates looks like. Next up are 5 episodes with some tips and tricks when doing model view programming. The first one is visualizing the model stack in Gamma Ray. If you don't know what Gamma Ray is, now is a good time for you to learn about that. So what we see here is the model stack that was on a slide a few slides ago, where you can see that I at the bottom have my model, then it has a proxy model on top of it for the training, for the date, for the cancel, a sort, and at the top we have the filtered model, and I can see what the data looks like in each level of my stack there. That is super useful. If you have a proxy model that doesn't do exactly right, that you can actually go and look at what does it look like up until this proxy model. What is the data that this proxy model is looking into when it needs to answer its questions? In your models, you likely return stuff like Q-strings and integers. So how many days a year? 212. And what is the current whatever, and you return a Q-string. Or you might return a color or a font, but you can return your own types too. And that's super useful because if you go and convert your own types into strings, then you later on might need to pass those strings to get back into the real data. And there's no reason for that. As you can see here, the data method returns a Q variant, and in my class, I have instances of the class money, and money can be returned like this. You need to have a way for the view or the view's delegate to be accurate to display this data. So the class needs to have a toString at least registered, and either, well, and not and, but either you need to implement a delegate yourself that knows exactly how to display an instance of money in this example here. That's episode 14. Episode 16 doesn't have much to show, but basically it goes and removes this Q variant : from value. If you have an implicit operator, what is it called, then you will be able to not need to wrap your instances in that, but you can make Qt do it for you. That's what episode 16 is about. We have, I believe, seen the operator plus trick where you have a class, an enum class, and you need to convert that into the underlying integer. And there is a trick where you simply can write plus that enum, and then it can go into a switch statement, for example, or it can be used somewhere where you expect an integer or an unclassed enum. And also the other way around, if you have an enum and you need to, or you have an integer and you really want it as an enum, for example, for the column, then you can enum cast column and then switch over that and get type safety into it. That's what episode 35 is about. Episode 59, really, maybe, I don't know, should have gone into the use cases. That's why I was just pausing here for a second. But look at the agenda here. What this Qt Table View Galore episode is about is telling you how do you stretch your columns. And it is anything but trivial to figure out exactly how do I, for example, make the last column stretch, or how do I stretch another column that is not the last? How do I stretch rows to their size hint, and so on and so on. And you can look at the table of content here. I must admit that I go and watch this episode like every month almost for when I need to stretch something. I know I can do it, but I can't remember how to do it. So I have this episode bookmarked. I can tell you that. We all know how it goes. A few lines of experiment and then it grew on you. And now you have a huge application in Python that you want to migrate to C++. Talk to us. We can help you. We have experts both in Python and in C++ and in the migration process. The final 8 episodes I would like to tell you about from Qt Widgets and more are the use cases ones. They are stuff that you would not think of doing yourself, or you wouldn't know how to do, or you wouldn't be bothered figuring out how to do it. And the first one here is actually relating to the previous one we saw. In the previous ones, I talked about how do you stretch your columns to match the content. Here I talk about how do you stretch your headers or limit your headers to match the column width. You see here, I have 3 columns here: bands from the 80s I love, my patch of the universe, which is my address in case you want to send me a thank you gift. Just kidding, or not. And over here, my family, in case you want to send them a thank you gift for whatever. But down here, I've stretched the columns, and bands from the 80s would be calling bands, and then there wouldn't be more space to it. But in this example, I show you how I modified my my header data, or the data and header data methods of my model, so they return a string list. Obviously, I need to do something on the viewing side of things, but that is relatively simply done. It's again a complete framework to cut and paste out of the episode and use in your own code base. And bands and Here I Live and Just Us does look better than bands and my patch and my fam. You get the idea. Episode 21 for that. Episode 5, very early episode in Qt Widgets and more history, actually got stolen from a coworker of mine, Jesper Pedersen, who put it into Qt itself. So if you're using Qt, then and you are in Qt 6.1 or newer, then what is in this episode is doable these days with just calling set sort indicator clearable. But what it does is that you can click here. Now it's sorted, ascending, ascending, and here the other way. And if you click a third time, it'll go back to being unsorted. And you can see from the rows over here that the data came in some sort order that I wanted to go back to. And that's what this episode about. It's not a big thing, but sometimes if you have the data in there, you might be annoyed that you can't go back to the unsorted data. Episode 40 tells you about how you get checkboxes here in your headers. And it's not that difficult. Again, once you have worked with Model View and gone through the whole series up until now, you should have a pretty good idea how to do that. But it's again a trick that is worthwhile knowing if you have a need for exactly that. And you might recognize that there's a lot of Depeche Mode in here. I'm a huge fan of Depeche Mode, as you might have known by now. And here you can see the CDs up until, well, not even the recent but one. So there's 2 CDs after this, but they are split in the table here. And there are headers in my table, as you can see, those huge black lines. How do you do that? Not trivial. And that's what episode 42 is about. I can't remember why I got tricked into revisiting that, but I did. And I did so in episode 77, where I talked about it. So watch these two, one after the other. I also had the need at some point to have some header above my table here. And how did I set that up? Well, that's what episode 45 is about. And finally, I think there are 2 episodes on a context menu. So there's actually a few different ways that you can get a context menu up from your Qt table views. But if you do not want to subclass and implement something from your Qtable view, you might already start being narrowed in. So I implemented a new subclass. I didn't want, so I did. A new subclass of Qtable view where I have the facility of creating my context menus in a very nice way. You should not watch this if you only have 1 or 2 Qtable views, but in my code base at least, I have, 100 different Qtable views. And for that purpose, it was very useful for me to get a mechanism where I could attach my context menus via some mechanism where I didn't have to subclass from the view again and again. And that was it. I hope you enjoyed programming with Qt Widgets up till now. I will say just a tiny little bit more about model view in the next module, where we'll talk about drag and drop. And as part of drag and drop, I will also tell you about some specific way of drag and dropping inside of Qt's views and Qt's models. But that is for the next module that will come out somewhat later. Until then, have a great time.